And joining us now with some insights on these type of investigations and where we go next, Jonathan Gilliam, Special Agent on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, as well as a former Navy SEAL and Federal Air Marshal. So, Jonathan, Ahmadi Coulibaly, who we just saw in that photograph, who's the kosher store terrorist, who may also have killed a policewoman just before this happened. So he's pledging allegiance to ISIS on this videotape that these radical websites put up. How do we know if it's real in the sense that he's just boasting and taking that cloak of boasting versus something that they really were ordered by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula to do this, or just taking that as part of this claim?
Well, first of all, it is real. Because you don't have to go over and, I mean, they did, obviously. Some of them went over and trained, but you don't have to just go over and be a part of ISIS. It's not like the SEAL teams where you got to go through all the training, you got to qualify to be in there. You know, you can take an oath of allegiance to what ISIS is spreading, and you're now an operative of ISIS.
That is tremendously chilling, because you're talking about lone wolves who can have this belief just by looking at the internet and to go off and do something, like allegedly the Sinarov brothers in Boston.
And that's where we're losing the fight. You know, politicians like to come on and spread rhetoric. I'm a tactician and a mitigator of threats. That's what I do, a threat mitigation specialist. So I look at things and I say, this is a problem, and one of the biggest problems that we have is that we're not stopping the recruiting. I then go out and try to find solutions for that.
So how do we do that? How do you mitigate and stop the recruiting and stop, why don't we just shut down some of those internet sites?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you.
Well, that's a good question. We should have been working towards this for a long time, but what happens, unfortunately, when it comes to threat mitigation from a political standpoint is things start to get watered down, or they trickle down, and just like the airlines, we don't look at something until a problem happens. Cybersecurity, not even a month ago, was a major issue. Now we're looking at France, where we have these types of attacks, but it's only a couple of days afterwards, and already this march today went from a march for freedom of speech to a march of French-Jewish solidarity.
Right.
That's how quickly these things change, and we lose our thought process and what we need to do to affect a proper mitigation of the threat.
And that is an amazing historic event that occurred today with what you just said, and even more importantly, perhaps, what the French Prime Minister says, that it's a march against radical Islamic terrorism. At least they're calling it is for what it is.
Right, and where was our president? See, this is where we have to start looking at things from a threat mitigation process. We have to start looking at things realistically. You've had Wally Ferris on all day, and he's an amazing thinker. He's a realist who thinks effectively. Lisa Daftari, she thinks effectively. Politicians, I could go for the rest of the show talking about people who do not think effectively, and the only way we're going to stop these things is if we start saying this is what it is and this is how we fix it.
Well, today Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that he's calling on all of the European leaders to share intelligence.
Right.
And I'm sure that they're saying, listen, political correctness has to be set aside. How do we adopt that attitude here in the United States, considering what you just said, how politics always get in the way? And how do we curtail the indoctrination? Go there. If you're a mitigation specialist, so how do you get to these guys? Because the terrorists are winning in terms of propaganda.
Right.
So how do we get in there and we stop it right there in the heart of the matter?
Well, there's different levels. You can start at the big picture. You can start at the small picture. The small picture is this communication process should have been started in 1979 when Iran took our people hostage in our embassy. If not then, it should have started on 9/11 for the world. Why is it every time we have something like this, we now say we need to have communications? That needs to be fixed. When it comes to operating and putting forces on the ground, we need to stop looking at things just like a UN peacekeepers project and start looking at things from a tactical assault perspective. If the world wants to start fixing these problems, they got to start looking at assaulting these problems together. And I'm not just talking about going in and shooting bad guys. I'm talking about assaulting the internet. You want to fix the internet, you have to do that all over. Otherwise, if they can't recruit here, they're just going to recruit there. And it's a world problem that we're having. Unfortunately for us, though, or fortunate for us, is that we have a logistics issue in our favor, where it's hard for them to logistically get people over here. but we haven't fixed the borders, so now that's one of the problems that we have to fix. But in France, it's much easier for people just to go, get trained, and come back. It's a little bit more logistically hard here.
Dianne Feinstein, senator, saying today they're sleeper cells, she believes, right now here in the U.S., ready to strike, so they are here.
Well, if they're a sleeper cell, you're never going to know until the day they strike. Boston bombers, not a sleeper cell. People knew about them. These guys over that just hit in France, not a sleeper cell. They knew about them. Sleeper cells are the ones that are in those no-go zones. Sleeper cells are the ones that are living here in public view but are subscribing to those because they're not somebody who's just a madman. They're subscribing to ISIS. They're subscribing to fundamental Mohammedism, which we also call radical Islam. They are people that are here, possibly planning attacks and not letting anybody know about it. That is a sleeper cell.
And as you said, you don't know that they're there until they awaken.
There is ways to track them.
Tell us.
On the internet, you know, looking at where they go and they have chatter, trying to find one piece of the pie that you can follow and then develop the larger puzzle. One of the best ways to do it, though, is by having the Muslim population police themselves. We have, since Barack Obama has come into office, have taken a step back from that. In New York City, Mayor de Blasio took a step back by pulling our surveillance tactics away. And if the Muslim community is not going to police itself, we're not going to be able to do it because that's been eliminated. So something needs to be fixed there. I think that's the biggest way. Is not necessarily just jumping online, not necessarily going all over the world, but actually getting them to look at themselves and police themselves. Politics and political correctness have to be put aside. Otherwise, we're going to have continued attacks and a movement. This fundamental Islamic Mohammedism is on the move. It's not something that is just relaxing. And I'll make this point, and this should hit everybody hard. In the early 1900s, 1.5 million Armenians were eliminated from this planet by this same movement.
You know what also strikes me is a guy like Kalabani, who took the hostage in the kosher grocery store. Not only was he known, he met President Sarkozy. Invited to the Elysee Palace, worked for Coca-Cola in a work-study program. So finally, what does that say to you about when they were trying to help these people, and look what they get? It says to me that there are agendas in place that are not effective in fighting this. Look, I understand politics. Politics is like being in professional football. Their job there is to get reelected, to maintain civility in a country so that there's not chaos. But we have to start having effective leaders, not politicians. And I know that I'm going into this political realm, but that's the case. You have to have effective leadership in order to get these things done.
Jonathan Gilliam, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And